You know that exact feeling, right? When you just casually pat your left pocket and there's nothing there.
Oh, yeah. The frantic little pocket tap.
Exactly. You do that frantic little pat-down dance. You check the right pocket, empty, and suddenly your heart rate just completely spikes.
It is pure blinding panic.
Right. The entire universe shrinks down to a single terrifying question, which is, where did I put my keys? We've all been there.
Absolutely. The biological system initiates a full-blown survival response over, a 2-ounce piece of cut metal.
It's so ridiculous when you think about it.
Mm.
But higher-level executive function just completely halts.
Yeah, it really is a universal human experience. And taking that moment of everyday chaos and turning it into a highly structured learning tool is just a fascinating pivot in instructional design.
Which brings us to our focus today. We are doing a deep dive into a single, deceptively simple document.
Deceptively simple is definitely the right phrase for it.
It really is. It's a curriculum guide and a transcript for an English learning module. Specifically, it's designed for level A1.
Right, so absolute beginners.
Exactly. People who are starting from zero. It's titled English Podcast, Lesson 59, Where Are My Keys? And the document explicitly marks that it needs to be delivered at an extra slow speed.
I mean, on the surface, it looks like the most basic language lesson imaginable. The stated goal is just to teach a handful of household objects and 3 foundational prepositions: in, on, and under.
But our mission today is to look past that surface. We are going to unpack the hidden mechanics of this document.
Because it is definitely not just a vocabulary list.
No, not at all. When you actually read the transcript of this lesson, you realize it is a masterclass in psychological manipulation.
100%.
We're going to analyze how this lesson uses spatial relationships, narrative tension, and honestly, straight-up absurdity to permanently weld new information into a learner's brain.
Well, teaching a new language to an absolute beginner isn't about handing them a dictionary or, a list of grammar rules.
Right, because that never works.
It doesn't. Words presented in a vacuum just float away. There is no cognitive friction, like nothing for them to stick to.
So what do you need instead?
Effective language acquisition requires constructing a physical and emotional world that the learner can mentally navigate. And this lesson, it builds that world from scratch.
Introducing the absolute bare minimum of physical elements, right?
Exactly. It creates a functioning linguistic sandbox.
So let's talk about the parameters of that sandbox. The source material outlines the concept of common objects in a room, and it gives us exactly 7 keywords to learn.
Just 7.
Yeah. We have the keys, which the text notes is plural. Then we have the phone, the bag, the table, the sofa, the fridge, and finally the room itself.
And then it introduces what the curriculum calls the magic little words.
The spatial anchors, in, on, and under.
Right.
But let me push back on the construction of this sandbox for a second. When I first read this vocabulary list, I was honestly baffled by how narrow it is.
You thought it was too small.
Yeah. I mean, if you were building a foundational vocabulary for someone who speaks zero English, this feels incredibly restrictive. And frankly, a little random.
How so?
Well, you go from small things like keys in a phone to a bag to a table, and then suddenly we just leap into the kitchen for a fridge.
Right. The fridge feels out of place.
It really does. Why jump straight to a large household appliance in a lesson ostensibly about a bedroom or a living room? Is this too narrow of a scope for someone just starting out?
It does feel like a weird leap.
Like, it feels like we are missing obvious words. What about door or window or chair?
I get that. It might seem restrictive, but if we view this through the lens of cognitive load theory, it is a brilliant utility of constraints.
Okay, unpack cognitive load theory for me.
So cognitive load refers to the total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. An absolute beginner is already overwhelmed just trying to process the phonetics of English.
Because it just sounds like noise to them.
Exactly. If you introduce 20 random objects, you max out their working memory, and nothing gets stored long-term.
Ah, so they just drop everything.
Right, so these 7 objects aren't random at all. They represent a meticulously calibrated progression of human interaction and scale.
Okay, map that progression out for me. How does a phone relate to a fridge in terms of scale?
Well, think about your physical relationship to these items. A phone and keys, these are intimate, handheld items.
Things you touch constantly.
Yes, they are extensions of the self, things you keep on your person. Then we scale up to a bag. A bag is a container, right? It's an object whose primary function is to hold other objects.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Then we scale up again to a table and a sofa. These are environmental interactables. They are pieces of furniture that we physically navigate around.
Things we place ourselves or our belongings upon.
Exactly. And finally, a fridge is a large stationary appliance. It is a destination object. It is expanding outward from the intimacy of the learner's own body to the perimeter of their environment.
Oh, wow. So the curriculum designer is drawing concentric circles around the learner.
That is a perfect way to put it. The self, the immediate container, the furniture, the appliance.
The genius here is isolation, isn't it?
It really is. These specific items physically exist in almost any listener's immediate everyday environment.
Right, whether the learner is sitting in an apartment in Tokyo or a house in Buenos Aires or, I don't know, a dorm room in London.
They likely have keys, a phone, a bag, a table, and a sofa right there with them.
The lesson is providing instant, universally tangible anchors for concepts that are actually incredibly abstract.
Which brings us to the abstract concepts themselves, the prepositions. In, on, and under.
Because prepositions are notoriously brutal to learn in a new language.
Oh, they are the worst, because they almost never translate one-to-one. What might be on in English could be in or at or an entirely different grammatical structure in another language.
It totally depends on the context.
Right. By tethering these slippery little grammar words to solid, universally understood objects, the lesson grounds the abstract in physical reality.
That grounding is incredibly apparent in how the text actually defines these words. This is a detail I found absolutely fascinating.
The definitions are so specific.
They are. The curriculum completely avoids complex grammatical jargon. For ein, the definition given to the learner is just inside something.
Simple and clear.
And for en, the definition is touching the top of something. And for under, it says below something.
The phrasing, touching the top of something, is the absolute linchpin of this entire segment.
Why is that? I mean, it creates such a literal, tactile, mental image.
It does.
When I read touching the top, I am no longer thinking about a grammar rule. I can almost feel the smooth, hard surface of the table pressing against the glass of the phone.
And that is exactly the point.
Same with enen being defined as inside something. It evokes the feeling of containment, like the physical act of reaching into the dark, enclosed space of a bag.
Yes, it bypasses the intellectual brain entirely and goes straight to the sensory brain.
Which is so much more powerful.
You are touching on a major field of study here called embodied cognition.
Okay, tell me about embodied cognition.
Historically, cognitive science treated the brain like a computer. Just a processor crunching abstract symbols.
Right. Data in, data out.
Exactly. But embodied cognition argues that our understanding of language is deeply, inextricably tied to our physical bodies.
How we move through the world.
Right. And how our motor systems interact with the physical world. Brain imaging actually shows this. When you read words related to physical actions like kick or grasp,
What happens?
the actual motor cortex regions of your brain responsible for moving your leg or your hand literally light up.
Wait, really? So reading the word simulates the action biologically?
The brain literally simulates the physical contact.
That is wild.
It is. So by defining on not as positioned above, but as the physical action of touching the top, the lesson forces the learner to mentally simulate that tactile sensation.
It activates the spatial processing and motor centers of the brain.
It's essentially tricking the brain into experiencing the vocabulary physically rather than just decoding it intellectually.
So we have these highly tactile building blocks now. We have our concentric circles of physical objects, and we have our embodied definitions of spatial anchors.
The foundation is set.
But human beings don't remember isolated floating facts. Our brains are fundamentally wired for narrative.
We need a story.
Right.
Yeah.
If we just leave the learner with the mental image of a phone on a table, the brain is going to discard that information by tomorrow morning.
It's too mundane. There is no reason to keep it.
Exactly. To make this information permanent, the curriculum designer has to introduce stakes. And that leads to a fascinating psychological manipulation disguised as a simple story.
The transition from isolated vocabulary to narrative application is where the actual architecture of memory is built.
The source text moves into a section titled Storytime, The Messy Room, The Lost Keys.
And the instructions for the hosts here are very specific.
Yes, they literally dictate, read very slowly, emphasize the words in, on, and under strongly so the listener can hear the difference.
So the auditory processing is being actively primed.
But the content of the story is where the real trap is set. The text introduces our characters. It says, Lukas is in his room. He is very stressed.
The panic begins.
He shouts, Anna, help! Where are my keys? And then Anna walks in, notes that the room is very messy and tells him to calm down so they can systematically look together.
A tragedy in 3 acts begins right here.
It really does play out like a procedural drama. Anna directs him. First, she asks, "Are they in your bag?" Lukas checks. No, they are not in the bag.
Step 1 fails.
Then Anna points to the table. Are they on the table? Lukas looks, and the text gives us a tiny bit of environmental dressing here. He sees a book and a coffee cup.
But no keys.
Right. He says, no, they're not on the table. Finally, Anna sighs and says, Lukas, look under the sofa.
A last resort.
Lukas gets down on the floor, looks under the sofa, and he finds an old sock. He physically recoils and says, yuck, no keys under the sofa.
The dynamic between Lukas and Anna here is just a brilliant externalization of the internal learning process.
I was looking at the sequence, and it feels like a linguistic escape room.
Oh, I love that comparison.
You have Lukas, who is trapped by his own stress and his messy, chaotic environment. The tension of the scene is palpable, even at a basic language level.
He is stuck.
And the only way out, the only way to resolve the tension and escape the panic is to correctly navigate these specific spatial prepositions.
The prepositions are literally the keys to the locks.
Exactly.
That escape room metaphor is incredibly apt because it highlights the necessity of the stakes. The psychology of this scenario is leveraging a cornerstone of linguistics known as the effective filter hypothesis.
I have heard of that. That was developed by Stephen Krashen, right?
Yes, linguist Stephen Krashen in the 1980s. Krashen theorized that there is an emotional screen or filter that can either facilitate or block language acquisition.
There's like a barrier in the mind.
Precisely. If a learner is bored, highly anxious, or unmotivated, their affective filter goes up.
And when the filter goes up, nothing gets through. You could be giving them the best lesson in the entire world, and it just bounces right off.
Neurologically speaking, high anxiety triggers the release of cortisol.
The stress hormone.
Right. And cortisol severely impairs the brain's ability to process and encode new information into long-term memory.
It just shuts the system down.
The language acquisition device in the brain essentially halts to prioritize immediate survival. You can't learn when you are running from a tiger.
Or when you feel like everyone in the class is judging your pronunciation.
Exactly. Now, think about the baseline state of an adult trying to learn a brand new language from scratch.
They are inherently anxious.
They feel foolish. They are struggling to understand. Their cognitive load is maxed out. Their affective filter is naturally sky high.
But wait, if their anxiety is already high, isn't introducing a story about a guy experiencing a panic attack incredibly counterproductive?
You would think so, right? Yeah.
You're exposing an anxious learner to an anxious character. Wouldn't that spike their cortisol even more?
That is the brilliant sleight of hand in the instructional design. It uses narrative stress to alleviate the learner's actual stress.
How does that work?
By introducing this specific emotional state, Lukas being very stressed over a relatable, mundane problem like lost keys, it triggers empathy.
Oh, I see.
The learner stops focusing on their own anxiety about not understanding English, and instead they project their focus onto Lukas's problem.
They get invested in the drama. They want to see him find the keys.
Exactly. They recognize the situation universally. We have all been Lukas.
Standing in the middle of a messy room, completely paralyzed by frustration.
Right. By making the character stressed, the learner actually relaxes into the role of an observer. The affective filter lowers because the pressure to perform is removed.
And it's replaced with the desire to see a narrative resolved.
Yes, and that's where Anna comes in. If Lukas is the stand-in for the panicked learner, Anna is the stand-in for the ideal cognitive process.
She's so calm. Anna serves as the ultimate anchor here.
She really does. Contrast Lukas's chaotic panic with Anna's methodical, calming presence. She just says, calm down, Lukas, let's look together.
When you are learning a new language, your brain feels exactly like Lukas's messy room. Information is just scattered everywhere.
You feel overwhelmed trying to find the right word.
Anna represents the systematic, step-by-step organization of that chaotic mental space.
She imposes a grid on the chaos. First, we establish containment. In the bag.
Then we establish surface. On the table.
Then we establish concealment. Under the sofa.
I want to zoom in on the specific items they find during this systematic search, because the text doesn't just say he looked and found nothing.
No, it gives us very specific details.
When Lukas looks on the table, the curriculum specifically dictates he sees a book and a coffee cup. Why those items?
It's a good question.
If cognitive load is so precious, why introduce extra vocabulary that isn't the core focus of the lesson?
Because they are culturally ubiquitous items that carry an incredibly low cognitive load. A book and a cup are universally recognizable shapes.
You don't have to think hard to visualize them.
Right. The text uses them to paint a picture of daily life, adding texture and reality to the environment without demanding the learner memorize them.
They are background props.
Yaxley, background props that reinforce the concept of all in. A cup rests on a surface. A book rests on a surface. They validate the spatial rule before moving on.
They are the control group of the experiment. They're exactly where they're supposed to be.
But then
But then, when Lukas looks under the sofa, the control group completely shatters. He doesn't find a mundane object. He finds an old sock.
And his immediate verbal reaction is, yuck.
The introduction of the dirty sock is perhaps the single smartest pedagogical choice in the entire document.
I completely agree.
But why? It seems like a throwaway joke. Why is a dirty sock the smartest choice?
Because it introduces physical disgust. Disgust is a primal evolutionary emotion. Think about how memory works from a biological standpoint.
Okay, biology.
Our brains did not evolve to remember abstract grammar rules. Our brains evolved to keep us alive in dangerous environments.
We are biologically hardwired to remember threats.
Yes. We remember things that evoke a strong emotional response, particularly negative or cautionary ones. You might forget what you had for breakfast 3 days ago, but you will never forget the smell of spoiled milk.
Or the exact location of a wasp's nest.
Exactly. The survival mechanism forces the brain to take a snapshot of the threat.
So by attaching that specific sensory reaction, the mild disgust of yuck, to the preposition under, the text is creating an incredibly powerful memory hook.
A multisensory memory hook.
It's no longer an abstract rule that under means below. The learner's brain links the spatial concept of under the sofa with the visceral, slightly gross feeling of reaching into a dark space and touching a dirty sock.
And that memory is welded into the neural pathways much more securely than it would be by just reading the definition 100 times.
It is literally hacking the brain's survival software just to teach English grammar.
It really is.
The learner will forever associate the phonetic sound of the word under with that feeling of unexpected disgust.
It's turning an abstract linguistic concept into a fully embodied emotional experience.
So we've established the baseline reality of this linguistic sandbox. We know the rules of where things should logically be.
The keys should be in a container like a bag or on a surface like a table.
Right. We've used systematic organization to search those logical places. But after this methodical search fails, the story takes a hard, jarring left turn into the completely unexpected.
The disruption of the established pattern.
A climax of the story. Anna gives up the search in the messy bedroom. She leaves Lukas to his panic and walks into the kitchen.
She opens the fridge to get some water.
And then, according to the stage directions in the text, Anna starts laughing very loudly. She calls out, "Lukas, come here. Your keys are in the fridge, next to the cheese."
So good.
Lukas runs in, and his justification for this absolute madness is just incredible. He simply says, "Oh, I was hungry this morning."
And Anna just shakes her head and says, "You are crazy, Lukas."
It's a fantastic punchline to the tension built up in the bedroom.
Yeah.
But let me play the absolute skeptic here.
Please do.
From an educational standpoint, isn't this profoundly bizarre? We are dealing with A1 learners who are already struggling to grasp basic reality in a new language.
True.
Wouldn't a standard reputable language textbook put the keys in a normal, logical place, like they fell into a jacket pocket or they were left by the front door?
That is what you normally see in textbooks.
Right. So why introduce such a ridiculous, absurd scenario? Doesn't a set of keys next to a block of cheese risk completely confusing someone who is just trying to learn the word in?
It is a totally valid concern. And honestly, it's the reason so many traditional language textbooks are incredibly boring and ultimately ineffective.
Because they play it too safe.
Exactly. If we look at the cognitive science of memory retention, the pedagogical power of absurdity is immense.
How so?
In psychology, there is a phenomenon known as the von Restorff effect, named after German psychiatrist Hedwig von Restorff.
Break down the von Restorff effect for me.
Sure. In 1933, von Restorff conducted memory experiments where she presented subjects with lists of similar items. Say, a list of 10 mundane words like desk, chair, lamp, pencil.
Just a standard list.
Right. But in the middle of the list, she would place one item that was wildly different, either highlighted in a bright color or a string of numbers or just a bizarre concept.
And what happened?
Her findings proved what is now called the isolation effect. When multiple similar objects are presented, the one that differs from the rest is exponentially more likely to be remembered.
It's the sore thumb standing out against the background.
The biological imperative to notice anomalies. If the story had ended with Anna finding the keys in Lucas's jacket pocket or on the kitchen counter, it would have been logical, yes.
But it also would have been entirely forgettable.
Exactly. A key on a counter is a low-contrast image. It would have blended in with the book and the coffee cup on the table.
It would have just been one more mundane detail in a list of mundane details.
The brain would process it and immediately discard it because it poses no novelty.
So by making it weird, they make it sticky. The brain is forced to stop and say, wait, what?
Human memory is optimized to remember the unexpected. By placing the keys in the fridge next to the cheese, simply because Lucas was hungry, the curriculum intentionally breaks the pattern it just spent the whole lesson establishing.
It creates a jarring, highly humorous mental image.
You can vividly picture it, right?
Yeah.
The cold metallic keys sitting right next to a yellow block of cheddar.
I really can.
That sheer absurdity permanently welds the word "in" to the concept of the fridge in a way that water in the fridge never could, because water belongs there.
I notice a subtle layer to that absurdity, too. The text doesn't just say in the fridge, it adds that specific extra detail next to the cheese.
Yes, that is a great catch.
But we haven't learned next to. The focus is in, on, under. Why throw next to into the climax?
This is a classic example of instructional scaffolding.
Scaffolding, like in construction.
Similar concept. The curriculum designer is pushing the boundaries of the learner's comprehension just slightly outside their current comfort zone, providing a temporary structure to help them reach the next level.
Oh, I see.
The core lesson is rigidly focused on in, on under. But by dropping next to into the punchline, the lesson is subtly introducing relational complexity.
It's planting a seed for future spatial awareness.
Without formally demanding that the A1 learner memorize it yet, the learner absorbs the context. The keys and the cheese are side by side.
They figure it out from the visual image in their head.
Right, without realizing they're being prepped for lesson 60.
And the delivery mechanism for all of this complex scaffolding is a joke. Anna laughing loudly, Lucas's ridiculous excuse about being hungry.
The humor is not accidental. When Anna starts laughing, it serves as an auditory signal to the listener that the tension of the messy room has been broken.
The linguistic escape room has been solved.
Yes. And this release of tension triggers a mild release of dopamine in the learner's brain. And dopamine is deeply tied to motivation, reward, and crucially, memory consolidation.
It's a chemical reward for surviving the escape room. Let me synthesize this, because the sequence of psychological triggers here is just staggering.
It really is an elegant design.
First, the curriculum uses the relatable panic of lost keys to hook the learner and lower their affective filter through empathy.
Yeah.
Then, it uses a systematic search of mundane objects to build the structural grid of the prepositions.
Right.
Then, it uses the yuck of the dirty sock to create a sensory, evolutionary memory hook based on disgust.
Absolutely.
And finally, it uses the von Riestorff isolation effect, the absurdity of the cheese-adjacent keys, to deliver a dopamine hit that seals the memory of the word in permanently in place.
You have just mapped the exact neurobiological pathway of effective language acquisition. It is highly engineered storytelling masquerading as a slow-paced dialogue.
It's brilliant. But a story is still inherently a passive experience, right?
Generally, yes.
The learner is listening to Lucas and Anna, absorbing these psychological hooks, and nodding along. But passive comprehension does not equal active fluency.
Not at all.
Just because you understand the joke about the fridge doesn't mean your brain can actually retrieve the vocabulary and generate those sentences yourself when you are the one standing in a messy room.
And that transition from passive absorption to active generation is where language learning usually falls apart.
Which brings us to the final mechanism of the source text, the interactive finale. The curriculum shifts away from the narrative entirely and initiates what is essentially a hide-and-seek methodology.
The interactive portion.
The concept is straightforward. Anna acts as the prompter, asking where an object is, and Lucas translates the situation back to the listener using the correct preposition.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
Let me walk through the rounds because the escalation is fascinating. Round 1, Anna asks,
How do you say?
the phone is on the table.
Okay, simple enough.
Round 2, the bag is under the sofa. Round 3, where is the old sock? And round 4, the climax. Where are Lucas's keys?
Notice how Lucas responds to these prompts. He does not just act like a translation robot.
This is the detail that blew my mind. When Anna asks about the phone on the table in round 1, Lukas doesn't just parrot back the target sentence.
What does he do?
He says, touching the top, the phone is on the table. And in round 2, for the bag under the sofa, he adds, on the floor. The bag is under the sofa.
He is physically reconstructing the spatial logic.
Exactly. He is doing a verbal callback to the incredibly specific tactile definitions we discussed at the very beginning of the document.
The embodied cognition aspect.
Right. He's acting out the definition before he applies the grammar rule. By appending touching the top to the sentence, he's forcing a moment of cognitive friction.
He can't just rely on auditory memory to parrot the phrase.
No, he has to physically re-verify the definition in his mind before he speaks.
This is a textbook masterful execution of spaced repetition and associative learning. We are moving from the safety of the story into active cognitive retrieval.
It's so deliberate.
By saying, touching the top, Lukas is forcing his brain, and critically, the learner's brain, who is listening and mirroring him, to retrieve the core spatial concept first. He is actively rebuilding the bridge between the physical sensation and the abstract grammar.
But the curriculum designer isn't done turning the screws. The safety net disappears entirely in the final 2 rounds.
Notice how the prompts change.
Yes. In rounds 1 and 2, Anna provides the full scenario. The phone is on the table. It's a direct one-to-one translation exercise. The learner has all the pieces.
They just have to say it.
But in round 3, Anna just asks, where is the old sock?
The training wheels are completely removed.
She completely strips away the context. She
Yeah.
doesn't give him the preposition under, and she doesn't give him the furniture sofa.
Yeah.
The learner is suddenly forced to recall the narrative details of the story.
From scratch.
And how does Lukas answer? He says, yuck. The sock is under the sofa. And in round 4, when asked about the keys, he says, I was hungry. The keys are in the fridge.
He brings back the emotion and the absurdity simultaneously.
He weaponizes the von der Storff effect and the evolutionary disgust response on command. It's amazing.
This is the absolute genius of the design. By bringing back the yuck of the sock and the hungry excuse for the keys, the game forces the learner to recall both the spatial rule and the emotional context in the exact same cognitive breath.
It's tying it all together.
The curriculum is taking these separate threads, the tactile vocabulary, the abstract grammar, the spatial logic, and the emotional memory, and braiding them into a single, unbreakable cognitive rope.
It creates a redundancy in the brain. If you are a learner trying to speak and you suddenly forget the grammar rule for under, you might remember the feeling of disgust.
And the memory of the disgust leads you to the memory of the dirty sock.
Which leads you to the sofa, which triggers the word under. The emotion acts as a back door to the grammar.
A cognitive safety net. And if we connect this directly back to you, the listener, think about how this methodology applies to your own life and how you absorb information.
Because it applies to everything, not just language.
Right. When you are trying to learn a new complex subject, whether you are trying to master a new software program at work, or studying for a certification,
Or learning a new language.
or even just trying to remember the names of 5 new people at a networking event, how do you approach it? Do you just passively read the facts, highlight a textbook, and hope the information sticks?
Or do you actively force your brain to play hide and seek with the concepts?
Most of us are entirely passive. We treat learning like a sponge sitting in water, just hoping to absorb the ambient knowledge.
But true learning, the kind that alters your neural pathways permanently, requires friction.
It does. Do you test yourself to see if you can actively retrieve the information from scratch? Do you link the new data to a strong emotion, a physical space, or even an absurd mental image?
If you meet a guy named Brian who works in finance, do you just repeat his name, or do you imagine a giant block of cheese next to him to trigger the von Storff effect?
Active learning is a sweaty, sometimes stressful, sometimes hilarious game of hide and seek inside our own minds. We have to build the escape room for ourselves.
It requires deep, intentional engagement. You have to manufacture the stakes. Let's summarize the incredible journey we've taken through this single-source document today.
It has been quite a ride.
What appears on the surface to be a delightfully simple, extra slow-paced guide for A1 beginners to learn 3 tiny words in, on, under is actually a meticulously crafted psychological weapon.
Truly.
Lesson 59 uses the embodied reality of our physical space, our physical sensation of touching a table or reaching into a bag to anchor abstract grammar.
It uses the highly relatable cortisol-inducing stress of a messy room to lower our defensive affective filters through empathy.
It uses the visceral evolutionary disgust of an old sock and the sheer unexpected absurdity of cheese-adjacent keys to build durable, permanent linguistic architecture in the mind.
It is a remarkable piece of instructional design. And frankly, analyzing it leaves us with a rather profound consideration about the nature of human communication.
What's that?
Consider for a moment how deeply our language shapes our fundamental reality. When an absolute beginner is learning to describe where things are in a room, they aren't just memorizing a vocabulary list for a test.
What are they doing?
They are actively mapping their relationship to the physical universe.
Mapping their coordinates.
Yes. These prepositions, in, on, under, they dictate our boundaries. They define our containment, our surfaces, our position relative to every other object in existence.
They are the mathematical coordinates of our physical existence translated into sound.
Without these tiny, seemingly insignificant grammar words, we are entirely unmoored in space. We wouldn't be able to communicate the location of our keys, let alone explain to someone else how to find them.
We desperately need the structure of language to impose order on the chaos of the physical world.
So the next time you lose your keys and you feel that hot flash of panic, just remember, you're not just looking for a piece of metal.
You're trying to reestablish your coordinates in the physical universe. You are looking for your anchor.
Understanding the cognitive science behind that panic might not make you feel any less stressed in the moment you are late for work.
No, probably not.
But it certainly elevates the experience from a mundane annoyance to a profound interaction with your own brain.
I love that framing. To wrap up today's deep dive, we have a challenge for you, the listener. Take the theories we discussed today and apply them to your immediate reality.
Test the sandbox.
Look around your room right now, wherever you are listening to this. Where's your phone? Is it on the table? Is it in your bag? Or is it in the fridge like Lucas's keys?
Hopefully not in the fridge.
Think about how you are actively mapping your own space with these tiny, powerful words. Visualize the tactile sensation of the surface it's resting on. Build your own linguistic sandbox and tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your spatial coordinates. See you on the next deep dive.